Before the world trembled at the sound of his armies, before cities burned and kings bowed, he was just a boy, a hungry, barefoot boy, abandoned in the cold wilderness. But that boy did not die. He fought, he killed, he learned how to lead. And in the fires of betrayal and survival, he began to forge himself into something the world had never seen before. This is not just the story of a conqueror. This is the story of how the world's greatest empire was born. From nothing. The birth of Temujin. Some say he was born holding a clot of blood in his tiny fist. A dark omen among the Mongols. A sign that this child would one day be a warrior. Temujin entered the world around 1162, in the harsh lands near the Onan River. His father, Yasuge, was a minor chieftain, respected but far from the most powerful leader of the steppes. His people were nomads. They followed the seasons, living in felt tents called gurs, moving their herds across endless grasslands. The Mongolian steppe was not a gentle place. It was a battlefield of tribes. Alliances formed and shattered in days, blood feuds lasted for generations, and betrayal was as common as the wind. A childhood torn apart. When Temujin was 9 years old, his life took its first brutal turn. His father arranged for him to marry a young girl named Borta from a neighboring tribe, an important alliance for the future. Temujin went to live with her family for a time, as was tradition. On his way home from that journey, disaster struck. Yasuge was poisoned by the Tatars, a rival people, while attending a feast. His death was more than just a personal tragedy. It meant political ruin. Without a strong leader, Temujin's entire family lost its place in the tribe. In the ruthless logic of steppe politics, the clan abandoned them completely. One day, Temujin had a family, a father, and protection. The next, he had nothing. The Hunger Years. Temujin, his mother Hoelin, and his siblings were cast out into the wilderness. No warriors, no herds, no home. They survived on whatever they could find. Digging roots, catching fish with their bare hands, sometimes stealing scraps from other camps. In the steppes, being alone was almost a death sentence. Wolves hunted in packs, so did men. Temujin learned quickly. Trust was dangerous. Strength was survival. A brother's blood. Hunger makes enemies out of family. Temujin's half-brother, Bektar, began hoarding food and asserting dominance. In the law of the steppe, leadership was life or death. If you were not the leader, you were vulnerable. Temujin made a choice that would define him forever. With his younger brother, Kasar, he killed Bektar. It was not just murder, it was a statement. No one would ever take control over him again. Captured and chained. But the steppes were not done testing him. As a teenager, Temujin was captured by the Taichiud, a rival clan. They bound him in a heavy wooden collar, a humiliating yoke meant to break his spirit. Most would have accepted their fate. Temujin plotted his escape. One night, as the camp slept, a sympathetic guard, perhaps impressed by the boy's determination, loosened his bonds. Temujin fled into the darkness, wading through rivers to hide his scent from hunting dogs. By the time the Taichiud realized he was gone, he had vanished into the vast emptiness of the steppe. This escape was more than just freedom. It was proof to Temujin that cunning and resilience could defeat even the strongest chains. Forging alliances. Temujin returned to his mother and remaining brothers. They began to gather followers, other outcasts, former allies, and ambitious men who saw potential in him. What set Temujin apart was his vision. In a world ruled by clan loyalty and noble bloodlines, he valued merit. If you could fight well, you rose in rank. If you were loyal, you were rewarded. If you betrayed him, there was no forgiveness. Rescuing Borta. Temujin's rise was not without personal trials. After finally marrying Borta, tragedy struck again. She was kidnapped by the Merkits, another enemy tribe. Temujin would not let her fate be decided by others. He forged alliances with powerful leaders like Togrul of the Karaites and his blood brother Jamuka. Together they attacked the Merkits and rescued Borta. It was more than a rescue. It was a public declaration. Temujin protects his own. And those who cross him pay the price. Rewriting the rules of the steppe. Temujin began dismantling centuries of tradition. Instead of keeping tribes separate, he reorganized his followers into units of 10, 100, and 1,000 men. This broke the old clan loyalties and bound everyone directly to him. When he conquered a tribe, he killed the leaders who resisted but absorbed the common people, giving them a place in his growing force. This was radical and effective. It meant that even conquered warriors could become loyal Mongols. Betrayal and revenge. Not all alliances lasted. His blood brother Jamuka turned on him, leading to a bloody civil war. Jamuka once captured 70 of Temujin's men and executed them in gruesome fashion, boiling them alive. Temujin bided his time. He rebuilt, re-strategized, and eventually crushed Jamuka's forces. When Jamuka was finally captured, Temujin offered him an honorable death without spilling his blood. Strangulation, the traditional step method for executing nobility. This act showed a complex side to Temujin. Ruthless, yes, but also bound by a certain code. The birth of Genghis Khan. By 1206, after years of war, alliances, betrayals, and victories, Temujin had done the impossible. He united the Mongol tribes under one banner. At a great council called the Kurultai, he was given a new name, Genghis Khan, meaning universal ruler. The outcast boy was now the master of the steppes. But this was just the beginning. With the tribes united, his gaze turned outward, toward the great civilizations beyond the horizon. And the world had no idea what was coming. The tribes were united. The army was ready. And the man who had risen from nothing was about to unleash the most feared military machine in history. In Chapter 2, we ride with the Mongol horde as they shatter empires and rewrite the rules of war. If you're ready for the charge, like this video, drop A in the comments and subscribe HistoryMind so you don't miss the next battle. They came like ghosts. You'd hear the distant thunder of hooves, see the dust rise on the horizon, and then nothing was left. This was not just war. This was a new way of making war. A force so fast, so disciplined, and so utterly merciless that entire kingdoms collapsed before they even understood what they were facing. When Genghis Khan unleashed his Mongol horde beyond the steppes, the world thought it knew war. The world was wrong. The making of a military revolution. The Mongol army wasn't just an army, it was an organism. It breathed, it moved, it adapted, and it killed with machine-like precision. Most medieval armies were slow. Heavy infantry, armored knights, supply wagons. They could only move as fast as their slowest cart. The Mongols? They traveled light, lived off the land, and could cover up to 100 miles in a single day. Every warrior had multiple horses, switching mounts to keep them fresh. They could drink their horses' blood for sustenance on long marches. This meant they didn't need to stop. Ever. Masters of the horse and bow. A Mongol warrior was a symphony of precision and brutality. From childhood, they trained with the composite bow, a short, curved weapon made of wood, horn, and sinew, capable of piercing armor at over 200 yards. At full gallop, they could fire accurately in any direction, even backwards while retreating. This skill fed directly into one of their deadliest tricks, the feigned retreat. The feigned retreat. The death trap. It worked like this. A Mongol unit would attack, then appear to panic and flee. The enemy, smelling victory, would give chase. But in doing so, they'd break formation, stretch their lines, and exhaust themselves. Then on a signal, a raised flag, a horn blast, the retreating Mongols would wheel around. Hidden reserves would surge in from the flanks. Within minutes, the enemy was surrounded, crushed from all sides. This tactic worked again and again, even against the most experienced armies in the world. The campaign against the Khwarezmian Empire. In 1218, Genghis Khan sent a trade caravan to the Khwarezmian Empire, a vast Islamic state covering much of modern Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. He wanted diplomacy, trade, maybe even alliance. But the Sultan of Khwarezm made a fatal mistake. He accused the Mongol envoys of spying, seized their goods, and executed some of them. When Genghis sent more envoys to negotiate, the Sultan had one of them killed and the others mutilated. In Mongol culture, envoys were sacred. Killing them was an unforgivable insult, and Genghis Khan never forgave. Hell unleashed. The invasion was swift, overwhelming, and apocalyptic. Samarkand, one of the jewels of Central Asia, fell after a brutal siege. Bukhara, a center of Islamic learning, was taken and its people slaughtered. When Genghis Khan entered Bukhara, he stood in the city's grand mosque and addressed the trembling survivors. I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you. The message was clear. Resist and face annihilation. Massacre at Merv. Merv was one of the largest cities in the world at the time, a thriving hub of trade and scholarship. When it resisted, the Mongols destroyed it utterly. Chroniclers claim over 1 million people were killed, though modern historians think the real number was smaller, but still catastrophic. At Nishapur, after a Mongol prince was killed in battle, the city's entire population, men, women, children, and even animals, was slaughtered in revenge. Whether the numbers were exaggerated or not, the psychological impact was immense. Entire regions surrendered without a fight, terrified by stories of Mongol brutality. Psychological warfare. Genghis Khan understood that fear was a weapon. He spread it deliberately. Survivors were allowed to flee, carrying tales of Mongol cruelty to the next city. By the time the army arrived, the defenders were already half defeated in their minds. Surrender often meant mercy, or at least survival. Resistance meant total erasure. This surrender or die policy allowed the Mongols to conquer vast territories quickly, without having to fight every battle. Engineering and siegecraft. The Mongols were not just horse archers. They adapted quickly. From Chinese campaigns, they learned advanced siege techniques, catapults, trebuchets, siege towers, and early gunpowder weapons. They employed engineers from conquered lands, moving them across the empire to break the defenses of the next target. No fortress was truly safe. The march west. By the 1220s, Mongol forces had swept across Central Asia and into Eastern Europe. Cities like Kiev and Vladimir fell. Armies from Hungary to Poland were crushed. But Genghis Khan didn't seek to occupy everything. Not yet. Many of these campaigns were reconnaissance in force, probing the strength of Europe. When the Mongols withdrew, they left behind a lingering terror that lasted for decades. The turning point. From conqueror to ruler. By the late 1220s, Genghis Khan's empire stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the Caspian Sea. He had toppled kingdoms, erased cities, and rewritten the art of war. But conquest was only half the story. You cannot hold an empire together by fear alone. Fear wins battles. It does not keep borders. Genghis Khan began building a framework to hold his vast new territories together. Laws, systems, and infrastructure would now become just as important as armies and horses. And this shift would create something the world had never seen before. A peace forged by the most feared warrior alive. The swords were bloodied, the cities had fallen, and now Genghis Khan was ready to do something no conqueror had ever done: turn the chaos he created into order. In Chapter 3, we reveal the empire of laws, roads, and tolerance that he built on top of the bones of his enemies. If you want to see the side of Genghis Khan you've never known, like this video, share it and drop A in the comments. He built his empire with blood and fire, but he ruled it with law, trade, and a tolerance that was centuries ahead of its time. This is the side of Genghis Khan history books barely mention: the builder, the organizer, the visionary who stitched together the largest land empire the world has ever seen, and made it work. From the smoldering ruins of cities rose something extraordinary: a network of laws, roads, and markets that connected east to west like never before. It was an empire forged in war, but sustained by ideas. The Yassa, law above all. At the heart of this transformation was the Yassa, Genghis Khan's secretive legal code. We don't have the full text. It was probably kept oral, known only to the ruling elite. But from historical accounts, we know it was strict, sweeping, and revolutionary. It enforced absolute obedience to the Khan, but it also created a level of order and justice rare for the time. Kidnapping women was forbidden. Theft of livestock, the lifeblood of nomads, was punishable by death. Military discipline was enforced with brutal efficiency. Leadership positions were earned by merit, not noble birth. In a world where clan loyalty and aristocratic privilege ruled, this was radical. It broke centuries-old structures and replaced them with loyalty to the empire itself. The Yassa unified a people who had once been fractious and divided. It also applied to all subjects, Mongol or not. That universality gave it legitimacy. The Pax Mongolica, peace through power. The Mongols were ruthless in conquest, but once the dust settled, they brought something astonishing: peace. The Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace, stretched from the Pacific Ocean to the heart of Europe. For the first time in centuries, caravans could travel the Silk Road with relative safety. There's an old saying: a maiden bearing a nugget of gold on her head could travel from one end of the empire to the other without fear. It's probably an exaggeration, but not by much. The Mongols protected trade routes fiercely. Attacking a merchant caravan was considered an attack on the empire itself, and punishable by death. The Silk Road, reborn. Before Genghis Khan, the Silk Road was a dangerous gamble. Bandits, warring kingdoms, and corrupt toll collectors made the journey slow, expensive, and deadly. Under the Mongols, it became a lifeline between civilizations. From China, silk, porcelain, and tea flowed westward. From Persia and Arabia came spices, glassware, and precious metals. From Europe came silver, wool, and, most importantly, ideas. And the exchange wasn't just material. Technologies like paper money, printing, gunpowder, and the magnetic compass moved westward, eventually fueling Europe's Renaissance. The Yam, the empire's arteries. To govern such a vast empire, Genghis Khan created one of history's most efficient communication systems: the Yam. Think of it as a 13th century postal service combined with a military courier network. Relay stations were placed a day's ride apart along major routes. Messengers could swap horses, rest, and continue without delay. With this system, a message from the capital could reach distant corners of the empire in weeks instead of months. The yam also served merchants, envoys, and even spies. It was the empire's nervous system, keeping distant regions connected and responsive. A realm of many faiths. For a man known as a destroyer, Genghis Khan was surprisingly modern in one respect: religious tolerance. He followed Tengrism, a shamanistic belief in the eternal sky, but he understood that forcing a single faith on a vast and diverse empire was a recipe for rebellion. So, he decreed freedom of religion. Buddhist monks, Muslim imams, Christian priests, and Taoist sages were all granted tax exemptions. Religious leaders served in his administration. In the capital of Karakoram, temples, mosques, and churches stood side by side. This wasn't just idealism, it was pragmatism. Religious freedom kept the peace among conquered peoples and attracted skilled, educated individuals to serve the empire. The role of women. Another surprising aspect of Mongol rule was the relative freedom and influence of women. Mongol women could own property, initiate divorce, and inherit wealth. They often managed affairs while the men were away at war. Some even held political power. Genghis Khan's mother, Hoelun, was a formidable figure, and his wives, especially Bort, were trusted advisors. In an age when women were often excluded from public life, the Mongol Empire gave them a voice. Cultural crossroads. The empire became a meeting place of cultures. Persian engineers worked on Chinese projects. Chinese siege experts broke Persian fortresses. Islamic scholars translated Greek works into Arabic, then into Mongolian. This cultural cross-pollination accelerated scientific, artistic, and technological progress across continents. The paradox of Genghis Khan's legacy. And here lies the central paradox. The same man who raised cities also built the safest roads. The same warrior who left fields littered with corpses also planted the seeds of a global economy. The Pax Mongolica was peace bought with oceans of blood. His laws were enforced with brutal efficiency. His tolerance came with absolute submission. To his enemies, he was a monster. To his subjects, he was a protector. The final years. Even at the height of his power, Genghis Khan remained restless. He continued to campaign, pushing the empire's borders further. In 1227, during a campaign against the Western Sia, he died. The exact cause still debated by historians. He was buried in an unmarked grave somewhere in Mongolia, its location still unknown. According to legend, the funeral escort killed anyone they met along the way to keep the site secret. An empire that outlived him. After his death, his sons and grandsons expanded the empire even further, eventually reaching from Korea to Hungary. But without his unifying leadership, the empire eventually fragmented. Yet his influence didn't vanish. Trade routes he protected continued to link civilizations. Laws he set in motion shaped societies for generations. And his genetic legacy? Some studies suggest millions today may carry his DNA. From an abandoned boy on the steppe to the ruler of the largest contiguous empire in history, Genghis Khan reshaped the world in ways both terrible and transformative. He was destroyer and builder, tyrant and visionary. His roads carried not just merchants, but the ideas that would shape the modern age. So, after hearing the full story, is he history's greatest villain or one of its most unexpected architects? Tell us in the comments. And if you want more history told with all its scars and glory, like this video, share it and subscribe to HistoryMind.